but I'm going to go through a few slides at the beginning. Not so much I'll try and tone down the sales pitch of the product and really just go into some examples after a few slides. But yeah, I'm Jamie. I'm on Twitter, x10.com/notrab. Notrab is Barton backwards. Everyone always asks me what that is, so there you go, some useless information. I try to do weekly GraphQL videos, so if anyone is working on any cool GraphQL projects and would like to collaborate with me on creating some content on there to share it with everyone else, I create weekly videos that are tried to be no more than 6 minutes long, and you can find that at graphql.wtf. And yeah, there's plenty of videos on the website that people can go through, covers everything from front end to back end. But today I want to talk to you about this problem that I think we all experience. Today we use so many different data sources to build web and mobile apps and everything else. But they all have their own SDKs and APIs that we have to use, and they're not all equal either. So the one thing that we're trying to do at Graphbase is to solve this. And the biggest problem, I think, personally, which I'm going to show you today, is that we don't often have control over where the data lives either. So it could be in one region, or if we can scale to multiple regions, we often have to pay for that data or those APIs to be replicated in each of those regions per provider as well. So those costs end up to be quite significant. And I think all of this as well ends up in a poor developer experience. We often have to duplicate those costs and all of those scripts to deploy everything everywhere. It's not ideal, so that's what we are trying to do that. At Graphbase, we're a relatively new startup. We are focused on bringing data to the edge. GraphQL is an implementation or a mechanism in which we do that, and we allow you to bring all sorts of data sources to do that. Very quickly, I'm going to talk more about this on Thursday in my Lightning talk. But typically, one of the ways that we make this faster is through edge caching. So you can plug in pretty much any database or data source API and make it faster and bring it to the edge. And the way that we do it is by connecting your different data sources. We've seen before, there was an array of different data sources that you can connect. And then once you've got them, here are some of the examples here where you can connect GraphQL APIs, MongoDB, even Open API. Similar to other tools in the space, we're able to look at one specification, transform it into another, that is, of course, GraphQL. And then we can bundle all of this into one API that we distribute to the edge. Then it's a case of deploying. You've connected something, you deploy it, and all you need to do is run a command that looks a little something like this. Then, once it's live, we can query it. Here we've got a simple query. I just made this before I came on stage, but a query to fetch data from MongoDB, data to connect to Stripe, and Contentful. This isn't new. This is what we've been doing for so long, but we are now bringing all of these data sources to the edge by transforming specifications into GraphQL or connecting databases that else live, like MongoDB or Postgres that aren't at the edge. We're able to do that very easily with what we're providing. So I'm going to dive into the demo now. And I guess this is where we'll just have a bit of fun. I'm just going to walk through creating a schema, showing you how easy this is. And yeah, if anyone does have any questions at all, please just feel free. I did want everyone to follow along and go step by step, but I've been told the Wi-Fi isn't so great. So you'll have to watch and we can talk through some of this. So let me just change my screen now. Cool. All right. So the simplest way to get started here, I think, is Graphbase is ultimately an SDK. That's all it is. And you end up creating a project in your application. So if this is a front-end app or whatever kind of app it is, inside of your project, you have a folder that is called Graphbase. Inside of there, we have a schema. And inside of this schema, we can define all of our different queries, mutations, any existing data sources, and create the schema for those. So we're going to walk through and create a few here. The first thing that I want to show you, actually, is the way in which you can create queries. So similar to things like Apollo Server, GraphQL Yoga, where you create type definitions and create schemas. We just do all of that inside of the config here, and it looks a little bit like this. So here we have a query that we can call hello. Then we can provide some arguments, and we can say it returns a string here. And then you'll notice here we have hello, and this is the name of the resolver. Now we don't need to do anything else other than create a file inside of our project that is called hello.ts inside of the resolvers folder, inside of that Graphbase folder. All of this code in the repo, once you commit it or push another pull request, Graphbase can automatically detect this, and we'll deploy a preview URL for you as well. So you're able to kind of work in branches on new things and add as much to the schema, and you get a preview environment. Once you merge it, it goes to production, and it's deployed around the world. We're built on Cloudflare, and all of this is kind of packaged up. We've just open sourced our Rust engine today, and we kind of bundle all of that using WASM, deployed to the edge on the Cloudflare network, which is really cool. But that's open source today if anyone's interested in learning out how we make all of this possible. But we think we can remove all of the complexity involved in having to install dependencies and write endless workflows in GitHub and wherever else to deploy all this stuff. So yeah, we're able to kind of look at your folder structure and your schema and deploy this automatically to the edge. So if we start the server, we don't need to install anything. We can use npx. Of course, it's going to install something, but we're able to run the CLI here. I'll use the latest version. I think we just released an update, but there we go. Yep, so that's running locally, and that's just looking at the schema file, and then it's running the local development server. Now if we go over to that localhost port 4000, this interface here, my good friend John, colleague here, created this UI that we call Pathfinder that will be open sourcing later this week. And this is where we can make queries to our GraphQL backend. So if we go into here, you can see we can begin to explore what everything looks like. And then if we go into the schema, we can see here that we've got that schema generated from the schema file that we use the SDK for. And then like you would expect, we get an output of the actual schema here. And we've only got one query, which is that hello, that has an argument for name, which is of the type string. So let's go back into here, make a query, and we'll call hello. And then we can pass some arguments if we want. And then we've got the result there. So this is a very, very basic GraphQL query, of course. But I think what I'm trying to get across here is that we're able to take the SDK configuration and that file, and we will deploy that automatically to the edge. Honestly, there is no other step other than running the npx Graphbase deploy command. If you're authenticated, of course, that will deploy it to the edge for you. Just a show of hands, who here is using a JavaScript-based Apollo server or GraphQL Yoga? Yeah, a few people, cool. So next, I want to move on to the mutation side of thing. Again, pretty boring example, but I just want to illustrate that we can kind of do the basics of GraphQL. So here we've got a status const that we are calling enum, and we're using the builder pattern here to generate the schema for our GraphQL, and then we can define things like the input type name, all of the different arguments and their types, and here we've got an enum ref to the enum that we've defined above. Then we've got the ticket, and then the mutation itself, and this mutation here, we're able to specify the different arguments. And here we have one which is input, and then we use an input reference to that RSVP input type. Then we return the ticket, of course, and then we have that all-important RSVP resolver file name. And again, over in our folder for resolvers, we have the rsvp.ts file. Now this is where you can do, obviously, all of your custom business logic like you are familiar with if you're using things like Apollo Server, Yoga, or in other languages, of course. You can install dependencies in this folder, and you can import them and do all of that logic there. And we will, again, take that and deploy that for you. So if we save that, this is not going to do anything but return the name and status. And we go back over to Pathfinder here, and we call RSVP. pass it the input. Then we choose from one of the enums here, and then very quickly return that data, and we get that data back. Basic GraphQL. Now, the more interesting stuff is when we move into things like MongoDB. MongoDB, I can import a connector from the SDK here, and then once we've imported that, we can call the MongoDB connector, give this a name or a namespace, and then we can provide the different values to connect to this. Now, this isn't MongoDB in the way you'd expect. This is using the Atlas Data API, so we provide the credentials here to connect to that. And then from that, we're able to then create models on top of our document. So if we have a document that we're going to call user, we can give it some fields in here, like name, email, string, whether it's nullable, or optional in this case we called it, and even other things like we could call mapped. So if there was a different field in MongoDB that's different to what you want to be shown in the schema, you can obviously map those fields to that. And again, if you wanted to do other scalar types like email, we support a bunch of other different things, even things like JSON, phone number, IP, some pretty standard scalars that we've added to the system. You're able to kind of create this schema on top of MongoDB. So what this actually generates for you is a API. So we're reloaded, and we go back over to the browser now. If we go to query and refresh, get rid of that, we'll see here we've got a new root, which is MongoDB, and then inside of here we've got some queries generated for us, and we also have some mutations generated for us as well, including many mutations to create, update, and delete. Then we got this query here. Following the relay spec for pagination, we follow this for all of our connectors, so you can work with them. They all kind of work the same, basically, and all look the same. So here we'll fetch the first 100 users. I think I've only got 2 added, but if we go in here and add name, maybe so we fetch the email, and we make that request. Oh, it's getting nothing. But we can mutate that, so we can change that. But we're able to make queries to MongoDB using this data, the data API. So this is part of the Atlas offering. We basically build a GraphQL API on top of that, push it to the edge as well. Now, there's lots of little benefits that I want to talk about that you can configure in the schema. So making a request to a resolver that returns static data is probably going to come back pretty fast. But when you want to return data from, say, MongoDB, you have to wait for the data to go to MongoDB and come back, and that could be in a single region, and then you have the issue of back to single region, how's Graphbase solving it? Well, the way that we solve it is through edge caching. So you're able to kind of configure any slow requests to have a max age and stale while revalidate properties, so you can persist that data to the edge, obviously once it's been requested. So further on down, if I just go to where we can configure cache, here I just have an array of different types that I want to cache. This is very high level, so this is just going to cache absolutely everything and set a max age for that. And there are other properties as well that you'd expect with GraphQL caching. We can do things like mutation invalidation. So if that MongoDB data changes anywhere, we're able to invalidate it based on its entity and its ID, etc. And you can configure what fields you can do it. Again, scoping as well. Within the context of GraphQL caching, you can cache data based on a JWT claim or something. So you can cache data for specific users, and then we've got the stale while revalidate. So this is how we're able to kind of take MongoDB's, all of the data from MongoDB and keep it at the edge with our platform. It comes down to caching, basically. So again, just like MongoDB, just like the collection query, we're able to do things like, here we're implementing the one-of directive, but although it's not officially supported, we want to get a head start and kind of look at ways in that we can bring this to the community and see if this is working at a larger scale. So if you add other fields that are maybe required or unique, the input type here would change. So if it was a user and the user had a username and you specified that the username was a unique field, the input type would be updated to include that. So that's MongoDB. Show of hands, is anyone using MongoDB or Atlas? Yeah, cool, a few people, awesome. So yeah, I really love MongoDB. I love it even more that I'm able to create the GraphQL type here on top of it that generates the schema. And I'm not just saying that because I'm from Grafbase. I've used Mongo for a long time, but now I like that I'm able to create this GraphQL API, and I don't have to do it myself. I don't have to create resolvers and then deal with data loading and n+1. I'm able to just define the types that I want, and also you can do things like maybe this is a reference field or reference type, and then we're able to do something like type and then add all of the names and the arguments, and then inside of here we're able to say this was an address. We're able to reference that field as well. So with MongoDB we're able to nest those nested documents as well. Today, actually, we just pushed a new release candidate for our CLI, which is experimenting with Neon as our first Postgres connector. So Neon, if no one's heard of it, has anyone heard of Neon? I'm sure a lot of people in here. Yeah, a few people, cool. Neon's pretty cool, this Postgres offering. I just created a few tables here beforehand, but we're going to give users that same experience to define inside of the Graphbase config what your Postgres data looks like. We'll also provide the ability to introspect that as well after. So here I've just created a few tables and inserted some records, and what I'm able to get from that then is the same kind of schema, the CRUD API that you got before. So with that saved, the CLI should have restarted, updated our schema. We go back to Pathfinder, and now we can see we have MongoDB and we have Postgres as well. So if we go to the schema now, this is getting slightly bigger now. And if we scroll down, we've got things like the user edge as well, which comes from the Postgres connection. So now, if we make a request to Postgres, like this. So here I've got a few different queries, the collection queries, of course, and the individual fetch by ID, username, etc. Queries in here. And again, this is not going to bring too much other than the data I've got in there. Let's fetch the ID, see if anything comes back. Cool. Content, we got anything in here? And again, we handle all of the n+1 issues as well. We do all of the query planning for this, for the different connectors that we have. So there should be some stuff there. So yeah, this has come directly from Neon's database. And then with that caching stuff that I mentioned, you'll see here in the bottom that we've got some cache misses. Once you deploy this, it gets really fast. This is in development, so what we're seeing here is just talking directly to Postgres, but once we deploy this, those numbers will reduce dramatically to like 30 to 50 milliseconds, if not lower. So here we have this GraphQL API now on top of Postgres. Whoops. Yeah, this must not be done yet. Like I say, the release candidate just went up for the mutations today, so we must just have the query. But again, you'd have that same experience with Postgres. The next thing I want to show you that you can do with Graphbase as well is that you can connect existing GraphQL APIs as well. So a bit like you can do with GraphQL Mesh and the other tools is you can stitch in these different APIs and then do various things. And those various things I'll show you. So here we've got a contentful GraphQL API. I have my environment variable set locally, and I'm just using this helper here for a bit of type safety for what lives in that file. But all of this is locally. All of this code is local. The CLI is running locally as well. And here we have the header set to access Contentful. And if I go over to Contentful, their dashboard isn't working for some reason, but there is some data in there, I believe. Yeah, their dashboard's not working, so I'm not able to show you what the data looks like, but we'll see what it looks like in the response anyways. So that's all I need to connect Contentful. And then we can see the Contentful query. And then we're able to query for properties, which is a model inside of Contentful. Where are we? Limit. So their API is a little bit different, but we can do the same thing. We can fetch all of our items from there, and we can also fetch the location and longitude of that. And I think there's only one entry. So this is where we had our offsite last year, and I've included the location here. But the reason why I put the location in there is because I want to show you something else that you're able to do with Graphbase. So here we have a remote GraphQL API that we bring into this single unified API within Graphbase. That's all running locally right now. But if we can attach the first concept, which was GraphQL queries, using resolvers, can we extend remote services with resolvers? That's something that we've wanted to do pretty much from day one. So here, inside of the same configuration file, or you could split this into multiple files if you wanted, we have a unit here, which is just an enum, and then we are able to do g.extend and then pass the name of the type that we want to extend, and then we can add additional fields. And again, just like we could with queries, we can pass custom arguments and the types of those, and then we can specify the return type as well. And then all we need to do is pass it the file name, weather, and this could be in JavaScript, this is in TypeScript. You can import things like GraphQL code generator to make these type-safe resolvers. We're going to automate that in an upcoming release in a few weeks. So all of this the root here will be fully typed. Then you're able to do all of your custom logic inside of here, and fetching from the root, I'm going to grab that location field, and then with that, I'm going to pass it on to the weather API. And then when I make a request, my query's gone. Property collection. If I fetch the items, now that new weather field will go to that API and return the data. So here we've got the data coming from the weather API, and we can pass different units here. So this is extending the Contentful remote GraphQL API that we've stitched into our service, but now we've added a custom resolver that is pushed to the edge with Graphbase once you deploy all of this. So we'll take that schema, we'll generate that, we'll push it into our registry, but we also add the resolver at the edge as well, so it's all kind of bundled up into one, and all you needed to do was create a file. Now we are adding support for different languages as well, things like PHP if we're still doing that. You can add those files in there, and that will be all packaged up. And then next thing, so I've used tons of different tools in the space to do things similar to this, but again, we wanted to have the same experience for extending GraphQL APIs, but also allowing you to generate APIs from an open API spec. So as I mentioned earlier in a few of the slides, something like the Open API spec, we're able to take the schema for that and then generate a GraphQL schema. So here, we're using the Stripe spec, we're looking that up, and then we're generating a GraphQL API. And again, there's things that you can do inside of here that you can with others, where you can exclude certain fields. So you might want to only expose a certain subset of fields from Stripe that are available to your users. So it might just be that we want to have customers or invoices or any mutation. We can do that. So with that saved, we can now see this is getting a little bit bigger. And we've got all the different queries from Stripe here. So again, if I make another query, we'll fetch our customers. Please ask questions if anyone has any, by the way. So here we've got some data coming from Stripe, directly from Stripe, that we can see there. And again, as I mentioned before, we're able to bring that to the edge and cache it as well. So if right now, this kind of query is caching absolutely everything that is queried from Graphbase. And we do some smart things with the response. So if we included the ID of this, I don't know if this one has an ID, but whatever it is, it there? Yeah. So we use the ID in that mutation invalidation. So if you were to use one of the mutations for Stripe, that would also invalidate build a cache key and invalidate that for you. If you only wanted to cache certain parts of the API, though, say you only wanted to cache requests to Stripe, you could specify that query as well. Apologies for my voice, jet lag. So yeah, we've got this data coming from Stripe. We're able to cache it now. So instead of going to Stripe every single time, it can just go to the, when you make the request to Graphbase, it will just return the data if it's got that in the cache, if it's previously been requested, of course. Now, again, I just wanted to show another example. Here we've got the Graphbase schema again, and we're able to extend now the Stripe customer. Here we've got that same response, customer response here, and that Stripe customer node doesn't have a field for their avatar or gravatar. Here we're able to create another field and extend that remote type, then create the file, the code needed. This runs at the edge, so it looks a bit gross because we're not able to import certain libraries that generate gravatars, but I'm sure there is a library out there. This is just what I could get working before. But here we deploy again this function to the edge as part of the GraphQL API. We're able to then take the email from the root and then generate the URL for the email for the Stripe user. And again, we're extending that Stripe email. Type this out again. Fingers crossed, this should work. Now we have it. We have that URL. That fetches an image. That's meant to look like me about 10 years ago when I had hair. And then again, the size here, we can pass different arguments. And again, it generates a different response. And again, we're able to cache this as well, so it doesn't have to run that function every single time. We're able to extend and cache all of that. And again, these resolvers are pushed to the edge along with everything else that we've connected. So that is a schema that I think is doing quite a lot. Let's go over it again. So we just got the basic GraphQL queries and mutations that we're able to define inside of here. And instead of our repo here, we're able to create the code that can resolve that data. And once you deploy it, it's pushed. And then we're able to add things like Mongo and create a GraphQL schema on top of that and to generate the API there. Again, Postgres, although it's experimental, we're able to generate that same CRUD-like API that you can then go on to extend with different fields as well. You can add a custom resolver for data that doesn't live in Mongo or doesn't live in Postgres. It can be something that you resolve at the edge with this. I think I've said edge far too many times. And then again, bringing in a different API, the contentful, that's GraphQL and Stripe. We're then able to add GraphQL edge caching configuration on top of that. And that's pretty much what we're doing to unify data and bring it to the edge and make it super fast, no matter the data source. I think the last thing that I'd like to cover really is the auth side of it. So we don't have any concept of users. We just work with things like JWT or the OpenID Connect spec to allow you to protect certain things as well. So this is just an example of allowing access all. You can access everything, and the values above where we've used environment variables for things like the headers for authorization. Well, this isn't very smart if we make the API public and then give access to things like Mongo, because people could just go and run whatever they want. But what we also allow you to do is attach different rules to different models. So if we have a user model, we're then able to attach certain rules here. So we're able to allow maybe admins of an admin group type to do any of the mutations to delete and update. And we can control whatever we need to in there. And we can do that on a model level. We can also do it on a field level. So we're able to add rules to different fields. So admins can only maybe retrieve notes of a user, or admin notes, or whatever you wanted to call it. You can specify the auth control there. But we don't do any kind of the auth side of it. We will talk to we'll grab the JWKS and we'll take that and we'll call whatever auth provider service you're using, and then we'll make sure that is good and we'll allow access through. We don't have any kind of user management. Bring your own, the same as you can bring your own database. So let's just head to the docs. Yeah, and everything I've shown, all the documentation is online, so you can kind of get started with it. We've got a bunch of different templates as well that you can use to get started. Let's load them up. So a lot of people use this just for the GraphQL edge caching and adding those resolvers on top of that. And there's a few examples in here that I've created to help you get started. So if you're using things like commerce tools, you might want to add caching to their API or extend it or join it with another API. You're able to do that in the templates there to show you how. There's a bunch of other kind of examples in here that you can kind of get going with. Most of these are around edge caching, and again, like I say, have some of the resolver examples in here. We started out like maybe early this year with a custom database offering, but we soon figured that everyone wouldn't migrate all of their data to us, so we ended up just making it so you can connect whatever data source you wanted and bringing that to the edge with our platform. So we've got the docs. I just want to show you some of the auth stuff. So different providers, we've got that OpenID Connect provider, JWT. It's as easy as adding it to the configuration, specifying that something's private, giving it the data that you want, the environment variables, and you're pretty much good to go from there. We'll handle the rest. Then further down, where are we? Custom authorizers as well. If you have something custom that doesn't use one of our supported, again, there's kind of an escape hatch to do whatever you want to allow or deny access. Then different rule groups here. Public was in the example that we've seen in VS Code just before. That just allows access to the gateway, and it doesn't prevent you from making any query or mutation or introspection query. That's just open in public. But if you want to lock certain things down to models, to fields, to everything, you can do that as well. And there's different types as well. So if you wanted to do a signed in type, users must be signed in to do certain things. That's there as well. Owner-based rules, that's in there as well. Field type level, all of that is there and can be combined as well. And all of this works with your existing provider as well, your existing user management service. So we've got guides on how you can do that with Clerk, Auth0, WorkOS, things like that. That's all supported. But yeah, that is the workshop, essentially. I wanted to spend a lot of time for people to kind of follow along, but I was told the Wi-Fi wasn't so great, but if anyone has any questions, please ask. I'm happy to go into anything. Hey. Cloudflare. Yeah, so we use Cloudflare workers. I'm trying to think. We use one of their, I think it's Platform for Workers or something. I can't remember the name now. But we use their, we deploy everything to Cloudflare. And everything we do is built in Rust. We've just open sourced it today. This whole engine. That is all open source, and the links are online for that. But you can check it out there. And the idea here is that instead of us saying, everyone come send to Graphbase and give us all your money to use it, if you don't want to do that and you don't want the managed platform, I'll show that in a second, but if you don't want the managed platform, you can just take the open source library and deploy it as you would any other open source tool. But yeah, it's deployed to Cloudflare, and we do all of this automatically. So if you create a GitHub repo with your stuff, we'll deploy it straight away for you. So I'm just logged in here. I've created a bunch of different examples. This is kind of our dashboard, and we can see all of the deployments as well. So we can see that this was deployed in a few seconds. Every time you make a change to the schema, we detect that, and then we'll push that. And again, if it's on a branch, we'll detect the branch deployment, and then we'll deploy that to a certain URL, and that is isolated as well. Again, we've got the Pathfinder. You can see the full schema. We're just exploring analytics at the moment. That's probably not a good one to show, but if I open up this thing, we can see here we've just begun to explore analytics and observability, so we're able to check exactly what's going on with your APIs. Right now, this is just the gateway level, but we want to break this down into the MongoDB, the Postgres, all of that stuff, and break that out so you've got full kind of observability of all of your services. But yeah, your teams can log into this and see branches, and if you deploy any changes to the schema, there's a diff in there to show you what that looks like as well. Yeah. Yeah, I love GraphQL Mesh. It's really cool. The one thing that we do is, again, it's a hosted platform by default. Although we've just open sourced it, similar to GraphQL Mesh, you can take that and deploy it wherever. We want to bring all of this to the edge by default. So yeah, I think developer experience as well with GraphQL Mesh. I love GraphQL Mesh, but sometimes it takes too much code to get started. With us, it's just a few simple, I say simple, it's a few npm commands to get going. npx Graphbase init will create you a default schema, and then you can run the dev command, and you've got a locally running server, and there's nothing else to run. And the fact that you can put this configuration inside of your project, when you push that to GitHub, if it's synced to Graphbase, it just deploys. There's nothing else needed to do. It just runs. But yeah, we're doing similar things to Mesh, but we want to work with data APIs more and bring those to the edge with the edge cache and stuff. I know they've got some caching things going on, but yeah, I think with things like the resolvers and stuff, deploying all of that stuff is pretty cool. I think with Mesh, correct me if I'm wrong, that also, does that support adding resolvers as well in the code base and extending the schema? Yeah, I think one thing that there's always this debate around like code first and schema first. I think with Mesh that I have experienced, you've got to kind of write the type definitions out and do this extends thing, whereas in ours, the SDK is fully type safe, so you can just do g.extend, pass in the type. That will soon be fully provided for you as well. So I'd say, yeah, the DX, the local running stuff, and the automated deployments, as well as the caching offering, all built in. It's all usage-based pricing as well. So if you want to work if you want to work by yourself and deploy something, it's totally free. And then if you want to work in a team, it's $20 plus usage. Yeah, no one be shy. Yeah, so as I mentioned very early on, I used to work at a CMS, for a headless CMS, and that was at the edge. but not at the beginning. It was in one region, and then, and then we, sorry, I'll start again. So we had, with that headless commerce use case, that was deployed to one region, and then the company would say, if you want it in multiple regions, you got to pay us. And then all of the consumers of those products are like, I'm having to pay more, and then they go to the next service, and the next service is saying the same thing. For us, we're seeing a lot of people that want to reduce those costs with each individual vendor. Say you've got 12 different services, that's going to cost a lot more than using us. So we're able to take all of that, push it to the edge, through the strategy of caching, of course. So there will be some requests to the origin of points, but yeah, we can reduce costs there and make that much faster as well. So I'd say, things like commerce and being able to extend existing APIs is quite powerful as well. So yeah, I'd say just caching in general, but also with the resolver stuff is like one of our most popular use cases at the moment. So the way that the caching works is we'll create a cache key based on the type and the ID by default. You can configure that however you like, so it could be off multiple fields or whatever. The invalidation side, there are a few different strategies on how that's done. I can't remember every single one, but you can configure how it's invalidated. So if you use the Graphbase gateway API, we'll automatically detect that you create a mutation to mutate product, and then we can then get that ID, we'll kind of project that ID to come back, and then we'll do what we need to do to invalidate. But we also have an admin API as well. So if you don't go through our gateway, but you have an app that's talking directly to the database, then you're able to kind of make another call or webhook or whatever it be to invalidate as well. There is docs on all of that.
For anybody that has questions, there's a mic at the stage. They're recording, so they'd like to have it be recorded. Thanks.
John, do you want to hand this out? If there's any questions? Any questions? Please don't be shy. We've got loads of time.
So basically, you can.
Sorry, I think we want to record the question. Sorry.
Are you able to self-host the Graphbase? So given the engine that you have open source, so basically, if I want to run everything locally, my AWS account or any provider, can I do this by myself or no?
It's only been open source today, so the docs are a little bit loose around it, but the idea is you should be able to deploy this wherever.
Okay.
That's the goal. I think a lot of it, I'm just speculating here, but it is probably very, very likely oriented around Cloudflare, but it should just work. The idea is for it to work anywhere. It just creates a binary that you can run. Yeah, no one be shy. I know everyone wants a beer now, right? I do. We all set? One more? Two more? There's another one over here as well.
I saw in your website that it's possible to connect to different data sources. And then I saw like Postgres, MongoDB, and also data warehouses. And then I was just wondering if you have any plans to add like Firebolt too, if you know them.
I don't, but if we don't support something natively, we can support pretty much, the way that you can connect to anything is just manually through the resolvers. But over time, we're working on resolvers like every single week to open this up to all of the different providers. But if you wanted to just query any data source and add caching, you could just create a resolver and then install whatever NPM dependency or make whatever fetch request you want. And then you're able to kind of add things like auth and caching rules on top of that resolver. So that's how you could probably do that today, given that we don't support that one. But yeah, there's a features page, I think. You could suggest that. Yeah, I think there was one more question in the middle.
Hi, curious if you have done some sort of benchmarking for load or performance testing for this.
There is some stuff internally that we want to release as part of the open source stuff, and we've actually been speaking with the Guild. They released an article yesterday on a bunch of the other ones, and we're going to update that article with them because I know they did a lot of research to release that, so we want to update that as well. So we'll be listed in there very shortly, and we've got all of this stuff internally, but we're only now beginning to explore the open source world and get what we've been building for like the last 18 months into the public. So keep following. Thank you. A few more?
I have a question about the OpenAPI integration because I think before,
Sorry.
yeah, in order to create like JWT tokens, usually you have to create like your own identity API, and that will return the token, and then it's like you have also authentication providers that provide the token that also integrate with your authentication strategies, or how does that work?
Yeah, so all we do at the auth level is we will call out to the relevant API that is providing your auth token. If you use something like the JWT provider, you can pass the secret in there, in the issuer and other things, and then we verify that on request as well. So if you were to generate your own JWT token, very popular one that we've seen is NextAuth. You can generate, once you log in there, you can get the token, and then when you pass that token along with requests to the GraphQL API from Grafbase, we're able to, because you've stored that token with us, we can then look up how it's encoded and decode that and verify it as well. I think in here we've got, these are the different supported algorithms for JWT IDC and JWKS. But yeah, there's different ways to configure all of these, but they'll ultimately do the same thing. If you were using something like Auth0 or Clerk, they have a OpenID Connect offering. They give you the URL, which is this well-known API. We get the config from that in those contexts, and then we'll grab the URL to verify and make sure all is good. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, I think we need the mic for recording.
If you have multiple TTLs inside of a query, how do you determine which one to use?
Yeah, you can specify on any of these connectors or the individual types the cache rules. Where am I? So you can specify the different cache rules in here or at a query or a field level. So you could just specify multiple rules, and you could put in whatever the type is. This is kind of a high-level caching config, and then maybe if we go to the top, it's on here. I don't know why that's not there. Yeah, you can attach different rules for different things. It's that's possible as well.
So if you have multiple rules, you have multiple rules inside of a query.
Yeah, the top level one
Whatever is the
would win.
lowest,
Yeah.
like the lowest TTL,
Yeah.
would be. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll just look at anywhere it's defined, and we'll figure that out automatically. But I like it because instead of just having a caching layer to cache everything, you can configure everything. I love it because you can bring in slow data sources and just make them fast, and never have to call out. And I've got several APIs that I use that bill me on API requests. I'm able to get around it with stuff like this, which is cool. Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff in here for the cache rules and the mutation and validation. So the global level, this is what that looks like. The type level, things like if we were to define a model on Mongo or Postgres, we're able to specify the cache rules for that specific thing, and even at a field level as well. You're able to configure that. Yeah, any more questions?
Yeah, how does this work with the schema stitching or like federation, where schemas are stored at different places rather than the single config file like this?
Yeah, so right now, we do want to support the more popular federation approach to the subschemas, but right now we're just focused on schema stitching. But for each of the data source, we generate schemas and then stitch those in to that. It's possible to bring in subgraphs and other APIs into this as well and be, the master, whatever, the super graph or whatever it's called, and make that possible. But we do want to offer more support, and I think things like GraphQL, I think there was an article by Chili Cream on GraphQL Fusion. We want to allow that for joining different federated services, so that's something we're working on next. And I think things like the Open API Federation schema that Wondergraph have just released, we've been speaking with them on providing support and compatibility for that as well. So it should, in theory, support both use cases eventually. Is that it? We all good? Awesome. Well, I think it's time for beer. Thank you.